Hi, now today I'm going to show you how to do a transmission refresh on a Mazda MX5. I'm going to use a Mk1 or NA Roadster if you prefer for this particular job. A lot of what I'm about to do also applies to Mk2, so it covers a fair few cars and is the kind of job you might want to do if your car's covered a few miles, if that lovely trademark short shift action's maybe got a bit notchy or not working as it should. Now you can kind of split this job into two sections really, the upper section of the gearbox and the lower section. For the upper section, we're looking at replacing these rubber shift boots here. These go inside the gear knob here and can after a while disintegrate or just fall apart and spoil that lovely shift action. The parts for this cost about £40, so it's a fairly cheap job to do, but it's also a relatively simple one too. The second part is to change the oil in the gearbox and the differential for the kind of the full transmission refresh. So if you just want to do the shift boots, then watch the video up to that point. And if you want to do the whole thing, then stick with me to the end. Right, let's get going. So let's just talk you through what we are going to do. First of all, I'm going to unscrew the gear knob here. I'm going to remove the center console and that will expose the upper shift boot. I'll take that off. Then I will remove the lower shift boot. That will mean I can take the gear lever out. Now it's worth pointing out that at this point there is a bit of oil in the top of the kind of turret that the gear lever sits in, so it can get a little bit messy. So I've got some towels and stuff to make sure I don't dribble oil all over the interior. Then it's just a case of changing the bushing on the end and replacing the lower shift boot, putting it all back together, and hopefully that is it. So let's get going. Start by unscrewing the gear knob. Pretty straightforward really, but that's somewhere safe. Now then, to take the centre console off, we've got screws here and here and a couple more in here. So I've got a little metal tray here, magnetic tray, that will help me keep track of my bolts. To get to the bolts in here, you need to take the ashtray out. Easy enough. Third one there. Now the last ones are just here in the cubby. And hopefully the whole centre console should now just lift out. Now you might have to just fiddle it around a bit. As you can see on the bottom there are some wires in here, connectors for the lights and the fog light switch and stuff there. So I'm just going to disconnect those, put this on one side and get back to you in a moment. Now then, as you can see, this upper shift boot has pretty much completely disintegrated. It doesn't look very nice at all indeed, does it? So I'll just take the camera off to give you a better look at that. There you go. Yep, that is pretty knackered, isn't it? So that's why we need to do this job in this particular instance, because that's obviously not as it should be. Now then, to get this off, I just need to undo these 4 bolts here, and this whole bit should just come off. So I need to use this. I need I think a 10mm socket. So there we go. That is what is left of my upper shift boot. Not a pretty sight, is it? But we can at least see now the whole shift mechanism in here. So what I've got now is 3 more 10mm bolts around there to remove. As you can see, this is where it starts getting a little bit messier. I can actually see the road through here, so All this time I've been driving, there's been nothing between me and the road. One of the other symptoms you might notice if your shift boots have gone is that you'll be getting a bit of heat coming through the transmission tunnel as well. So, oh, there we go. Classic case of dropping something there. This calls for the magic magnetic wand. Back in a second. Right, so I've got my magnetic wand now. This really is a fantastic tool. If you don't already have one in your toolbox, go and get one. Because whenever you hear that horrible sound of a bolt clattering under the car or in some deep recess of the engine bay, that is your saviour. Now then, hopefully now, with the gearbox in neutral, the gear lever should now just come out. And there we go. Now, as I said, this turret here on the top of the transmission is full of oil, so this shift lever will dribble some oil, so be ready with something to catch it. And there you can see that is the gear lever with the bushing on the end that we're going to replace, middle bushing, and also fairly unpleasant looking remains of my lower shift boot. So now it's just going to be a case of taking all those broken old bits off, putting new ones on and putting it all back together. Okay, so this is my gear lever here. I persuaded the little nylon bushing off the end with put this in a vise and gave it a bit of a tap, and then I just pulled up the remains of the old shift boot up the shaft like that. This is a little washer or bushing that goes at the top, and there's a little spring washer goes on top of it. You can see that that has little indents here where the little arms from the spring washer go. So now it's just a case of putting it all back together. So put the little spring washer back together. You'll see the three little bits clip into the bushing there. Slide that back over the shifter. That's the bushing that it turns on there. And then it should just be a case of pushing the new lower shift boot down the shaft of the shifter. So you saw me struggling a bit there to get this lower shift boot on. Top tip, I just dipped my finger in the oil in the turret and the gearbox there, wiped some oil on the shaft, and it just slipped on down. So that's all good to go. Now I just need to put my little lower bushing on. That hopefully should just press on. There. Okay, so that's all back together. That is ready to go in, but before I do that, I'm just going to take the old oil out of the shift turret there and dispose of it safely. So I'm just going to put that on one side. I've got a syringe here so I can suck out this old oil. I'm told there should be about 100 millilitres in here. This is where you need to make sure you've got your towels and everything to hand. Obviously it goes without saying that you dispose of the oil safely. Right, so I'll spare you the sucking the oil out of the turret there, but suffice to say that is out now, so it's a case of topping it up with some fresh oil. So simply take a funnel and my gearbox oil here. This is 750-90 fully synthetic transmission oil. Now then, what I need to do is bring this up to about 25 millimeters below the top of the turret. So that looks about right. And that should be it. Now it's just a case of putting it all back together. Now then, you'll see here I've got my upper bushing with the spring washer on the top. I've got my new lower bushing. I've got my lower shift boot. On the big ball here, you'll see there's a slot. Now at the front of the transmission turret, there's a little pin. So you need to just align that slot there, that pin at the front, and it should all just drop in. Okay, so it took a little persuasion to get in there, shall we say, but just a bit of pressure from the top seems to have seated it there securely. So just be a case now of putting in those 3 10mm bolts that hold the lower shift boot in place. Of course, doing up those bolts, these don't need to be very tight apparently, just kind of a little more than hand tight, so don't go crazy. And if all has gone according to plan, that should be all back together. So let's give it a go. Let's see if yeah, so that seems to work. Nice short shift action, as of course we all appreciate with an MX5. So yeah, that all looks good to put back together. So clean my hands up a bit here. It's just a case of putting on my new top shift boot. Simple enough. That just goes in like that, slides down onto the shaft there. Now then, don't forget to bring out this metal bracket that sits on top of the bolts there. And then it's just a case of putting these 4 10mm bolts back in. And there we go. Upper and lower shift boots installed. And as you could see from what was left of that one that I replaced, very, very much worth my while doing. Thankfully I don't live on a hill, so I can put that handbrake off for better access with the spanner. So again, these don't need to be mega tight, just nip them up basically. Right, I'll just give that a nice little check. Worst, second, third, fourth, fifth, and reverse. Okay, that looks good, doesn't it? So I think basically we should be now ready to put the centre console back on. So I'll just grab this from where it's been sitting up there. I just have to reconnect the electrical connections here for the fog light and for the window switches. Simple as that. I've still got some remains of noise insulation there, and then it's just a case of navigating the boot and fuel cap release switches through there, around the gear knob, over the brake lead, handbrake, and then stuff back all those bits of wire. That should all be good. Have the ashtray back in. Screw the gear knob back on. So there we go, that is the shift boot done and dusted. And that is kind of really the end of the first stage of this, the top end of the transmission refresh. And that might be enough. You may be done with that, in which case off you go, enjoy your car, have some fun. If, however, you want to carry on and do the full transmission fluid change in the gearbox and diff, stick with me and we'll get on with that. So we've changed the shift boot on the top end of the gearbox. If you're sticking with me for the full transmission refresh, the next job is to change the oil in the gearbox and then also the differential. To do that, I have taken the car for a bit of a drive just to test the shift boots and get the oil nice and warm. It's just like changing the oil in the engine in that respect, so nice and warm, so it'll flow out of the gearbox and diff casing nice and easily. Next job before I go any further is to jack the car up. I need all four wheels off the ground because the car needs to be level when we're taking the oil out of the gearbox and diff. That obviously comes with some dangers, so make sure you know what you're doing and are confident in jacking the car up safely and working underneath it. So with those disclaimers out of the way, let's get on with it. Well, welcome to the underside of my UNOS. Right, two things to be looking at here for doing this transmission oil change. On the side, I've got this level check plug here, and then on the bottom, the main drain plug here. So to undo the side plug first, obviously I've warmed the engine up so everything's a bit warm down here. Exhaust has cooled down a little bit, but I can feel some heat coming off the transmission, so hopefully that's all nice and warm inside. But just be careful obviously if you have just run the car, because this exhaust here is going to be very hot and you don't want to burn your face or anything else like that. So just checking, so I need my catch tank here because there's going to be lots of oil and stuff starts coming out. So let's just bring that over here. Hopefully you can still see what's going on. So I've got a 14mm open spanner here. This will be enough to just undo this drain plug, hopefully. There we go, that's coming loose. We're doing it the right way. There we go. So I'm going to have to be very careful here because obviously oil will start coming out. So make sure I've got my catch tank in place. That is pretty much loose now. I'll do that with my fingers, but just got to be careful here for the oil that will inevitably start coming out. There we go. So there is the drain plug. Keep that safe. Now then, this is where it will get messy. Got a big 24mm bolt on the bottom of the gearbox here. I did have to crack this with a breaker bar. It was quite tight to begin with, so just be wary of that. So that is now hand tight, and as I undo it, there we go. There is the transmission oil coming out, and it is making a terrible mess, and I've got it all over my hands. Probably should have worn some gloves, shouldn't I? But leave that to dribble out for a bit, and then we can come back under, put the plug back in and start figuring out how we're going to get the oil back in. Right, so I've done the messy business of getting the old oil out. I've put the plug back in the bottom here. That's that big 24mm bolt. Now this is the tricky bit as to how you get the oil back in the gearbox, because the port where you fill it up is here on the side down by the exhaust. There are various methods you could use for doing this. One would be while you've got the transmission tunnel open when you're doing the shift boots, would be to run something down through that way. I've actually robbed an idea off somebody on the Piston Heads forum who suggested getting some 12.5mm hose pipe, which I went down and got from B&Q, and I've run that down through the engine bay, and that means I can just feed that into the gearbox here. So that's running down through the engine bay, and the idea being that now I can do it all from the top of the car, so I can just set up a funnel on the bulkhead and pour the oil in that way. So fingers crossed that works. The first step was getting the hose pipe into the side of the gearbox, so that seems to fit, so that's good. It'll just be a question now of patiently dribbling the oil in from the top. Right, so as you can see, I managed to feed my hose pipe down between the exhausts and into the side of the gearbox. I've rigged up this little filling system here, so I've just zip tied a funnel onto the bulkhead here, and that means I can just take my transmission oil, which is 75 weight 90, that's supplied by MX5 parts, and I can just fill it up through the funnel and into the gearbox. Now there's 2 litres of oil goes into the gearbox, so I've got 2 1 litre containers like this. Just keep topping it up and have a look under the car to make sure it's not dribbling out underneath. Okay, so there is a bit of oil dribbling out underneath, so I'll probably just need to pour it a little bit more slowly just to stop it slopping out the other end. So it should take a little while, so I'm just going to crack on with this, and then hopefully we can finish off underneath, and that's the gearbox oil done. Okay, right, so that's my 2 litres of gearbox oil poured in through my nifty little filling system. Thank you to the piston heads chap for the tip on that. Seems to work really well. Now I just need to remove that and put the plug into the side of the gearbox, having checked the level through that, and we should be good to go and ready to move on to the diff. Right, so we've done the gearbox oil, now it's time to do the same with the differential. The process is pretty much the same. We've got 2 plugs, one at the top for checking the level, one at the bottom for draining. They're both 24mm bolts. Now you have to be a little bit careful here because obviously it's aluminium casing, you don't want to strip that or do anything unpleasant, so I used some penetrating oil first and was very careful about cracking them. I've already done that just to make sure that they move, and they do. So that established, it's time to undo the top one. Okay, so that's finger tight now. That comes out easily enough. I think the way to tell the difference between the two is that the check one has got a slightly thicker head on it. And now, in case of undoing the drain plug and catching whatever comes out with my tray here. There we go. That works, and once again I managed to drop the plug into the oil, so I've got some fishing about to do there. So we'll just let that drain out, and then I've got to try and figure out a way of getting a litre of oil back into this diff. So as I said, I was pondering on how I was going to get the new oil into the differential, and I've come up with an adaptation of that kind of improvised oil filling system I used for the gearbox. So again, thanks to the chap on Piston Heads who posted that original tip up, and it seems to work for this as well, because the 12.5mm pipe is a good fit into the plug hole at the upper of the 2 holes in the differential where you're going to fill the oil in. It fits in quite nicely, and then I can just run the hose pipe under the wheel arch here and then top up the oil through my funnel here and just let it glug down through the hose pipe. I can lift it up to make sure that gravity do its work. The diff holds about a litre of oil, so it's going to take a little while, but this should hopefully be a nice clean way of filling the differential, and I'll know it's full when it starts dribbling out of the upper of the 2 plugs. So I'll just keep filling that up and then we should be good to go. Okay, so my adapted version of the oil filling system seemed to work quite nicely. I've got a litre of fresh oil in my diff, I've got my 2 litres of fresh oil in the gearbox here, I've got my new shift boots and the lovely smooth gear shift action there, so maximum Jimbat Isai effect there. So all good, I'm really happy. The shift boot change was very straightforward. You could do that, say, without jacking the car up or getting underneath it. The transmission oil and the diff oil change was a little bit more involved, but I'm glad it's done and my car is now all set and good to go. Hope you found this useful and see you for the next one.